Welcome to our Advent podcast on the four last things of death, judgment, heaven, and hell. My name's Nick. I'll be your host, as I was for the previous couple of episodes. And our contributors so far have made it look so easy and so fun. I've decided to have a crack myself this week at our topic of heaven. But I'm still joined by a guest. So Sally is going to introduce herself.
Hello everyone, my name is Sally Martin Brown and I'm currently the Director of Music at St Mary's Church, Spring Grove. I started off in the United Reformed Church from the age of 0 to 10 and I came to sing in St Mary's Church Choir by doing a guide service badge, and at the time the two guide captains were Joan Hazel, our sister who we lost in her 90s recently, and Marjorie Stevens, Catherine Taylor's mother, and the wife of the director of music, Howard Stevens. And they were in the choir. So there was a lot of choral singing going on. And this is my first experience of the kind of a choir that St Mary's had then. There were about 40 people, and I was probably the third little treble on the end of the row of seats. And it was an extraordinary time to be involved in music. I was already a recorder player and a oboist and other instruments. So I was already involved in music, but I'd never heard sacred music like this before. And so now it's over 50 years since I've been singing choral music or directing it or teaching it. And the thing about sacred choral music is that the tradition over the last 500 years has been in setting the Bible to music. One, to teach people in terms of singing it more often, I guess, and expressing it, but way back just as a way of communally saying it together. So if you all speak slightly different languages, slightly different tones, have different amount of energy, then if you try to say stuff together, it doesn't always quite work in a communal way of singing something like plain song where you're singing one syllable to note. And I think you can focus on it, and as has been said, singing is praying twice. You can think about it perhaps in a more studied way, and often there's repetition of it too.
Welcome, Sally. I'm looking forward to hearing your contributions. I should probably say why I've chosen heaven to jump in on as a topic as well. And I think it's because there are just so many competing pictures or images of heaven out there. It's really commonplace thing to refer to. So if you just go to my go-to decade of the 1980s for popular music, there was Bryan Adams' Heaven, The Cure's Just Like Heaven, Belinda Carlisle, Heaven's Place on Earth, Wham, The Edge of Heaven, and the band Heaven 17. So lots of heaven in there, and probably plenty more besides. And in the Scouts in the 80s, we used to sing about how you could never go to heaven in a variety of ways. You'll never go to heaven in a jumbo jet because the Lord ain't got no runways yet. You'll never go to heaven in a baked bean tin because a baked bean tin's got baked beans in, and so on and on and on. So lots of competing visions, but some of them don't really stack up. So in some of those songs, heaven is used to express an inexhaustible love that doesn't always make it to the end of the song, let alone for all eternity. So it'd be really good to try and get out of some of these a bit more about what the Bible tells us about the real heaven, the actual heaven that happens at the end of the world as we know it. And that's what I'm hoping to help us do today. Let's start our look at heaven with this week's Bible reading, which is from the Revelation to St. John the Divine.
Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. That whole reading I've known for a long time. It's Revelations 21 verses 1 to 5, because I've sang the Bainton anthem to those words, and the image of heaven in it is not about a picture or some feeling of even God as an old man looking down from the clouds. It's entirely about the emotion of what a feeling of the first heaven and the first earth all gone, and a new heaven, a new mood. And I was struck most by the later part of the reading. So it begins, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first had passed away, and there was no more sea. So in music we call it melisma, when you specifically draw out a word and it's done to actually focus your attention on it. So the first heaven and the first earth had passed away and the sea was no more. That's extraordinary. That's 7/10 of the earth. So what would this heaven be? And the reading goes on and said, and God will wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow or crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things have passed away. And when you listen to the way he sets it, the death will be, there'll be no more crying, no more pain. All those things have gone. That is what I feel that this reading and my idea of heaven is the absence of those, not particularly necessarily a picture of perfection or something, just the absence of all those. And there is a tenor solo near the end, which really is like mankind saying, well, we want this to be true. So I'm just going to play you a little bit of that now. And I think the link for this will be in the notes of the podcast. But here's the tenors just saying some of those words. All tears will be wiped away. So I guess that was my introduction to words that are quite difficult about heaven in Revelation to sort of imagine as a smaller child or a teenager.
Revelation 21 is a stonking passage. There's so much in it, but unlike quite a lot of the rest of Revelation, it's quite accessible as a concept. At the end of things, at the end of the world, if you like, the old heaven and the old earth pass away, and there's a new heaven and a new earth in a new kind of relationship. That the dwelling place for people comes down from heaven. So heaven comes down to earth, and earth kind of goes up to heaven to meet it, and the two become united in a way that currently they're not. I mean, maybe in Jesus we start to see that coming together of heaven and earth, and all sorts of miraculous and wonderful and lovely things happen. And that's what we read about in the Gospels. That's the kingdom of heaven coming close. But imagine if it's not only come close, but it's here and it's fully here. That's a glorious future. So, look, we may not yet have got to the place where there's no more crying, no more tears, no more pain. But when we do get there, it will be magnificent.
This train is bound for glory. This train is bound for glory, this train. This train is bound for glory, this train. This train is bound for glory. Don't carry nothing but the righteous and the holy. This train is bound for glory, this train. This train don't pull no gamblers, this train. This train don't pull no gamblers, this train. This train don't pull no gamblers, liars, thieves, midnight ramblers, this train. Don't pull no gamblers, this train. This train don't pull no jokers, this train. This train don't pull no jokers, this train. This train don't pull no jokers, cigarette puffers or cigar smokers. This train don't pull no jokers, this train. Well, this train is awful vacant, this train. This train is awful vacant, this train. This train is awful vacant, hardly a seat has been taken. This train is awful vacant, this train. Well, this train's leaving in the morning, this train. This train's leaving in the morning, this train. This train's leaving in the morning, and it's gonna be a new day dawn. This train, it's leaving in the morning, this train.
So then I was asked to listen to a second piece, This Train, and I listened to the original version, and I have heard it before. I haven't listened to it in order to translate my view of heaven, if you like, from it. And the context is a suggestion to some extent that you can't get in if you've engaged in gambling or smoking. It talks about a clean train, and of course that assumption is that when none of us are perfect, we will all fall short. I think that's a different driving attention to how we might get in there, if we get in it in that sense at all. The question was, how is my reflection of heaven? So I guess I would say, well, perhaps the desires on earth which lead us to needing or addicted to certain methods of behavior or certain substances will no longer be necessary, because he shall wipe away all tears. So our feeling of identity of ourselves, our feeling of contentment and happiness, our feeling of generosity with others to exist, will be such that heaven will not need those things to be part of us, our personalities.
This train is bound for glory, this train. I grew up with the Joan Baez version of this song. Everyone's version is different, but I quite like Joan Baez's version for the verse that says, "This train's awful vacant, hardly a seat has been taken." Now, I like it, but I don't necessarily agree with it. There's a particular view of heaven in that, and indeed a lot of the rest of the song, which is about who's in and who's out, depending on their behaviour. And as we were hearing about judgment last week, that's not our call, it's God's call. So, in a way, yes, it's true, there are all sorts of bad behaviours that mean we don't deserve to be on the heavenly special. But of course, Jesus has sorted that out for us as Christians. So he's bought our ticket, if you like. He's punched it, he's put us on the train, and he's going to meet us at our destination. So this train is bound for glory, and actually a lot of people are going to be on it, including maybe a few that we wouldn't perhaps have predicted. So that's the glory of it. I love the song. I don't entirely agree with the message.
And so it's heaven is so far of the mind that with the mind dissolved, the sight of it by architect could not again be proved. 'Tis vast as our capacity, as fair as I idea, to him of adequate desire, no further 'tis than here. What that reminded me of was almost that inconceivable vastness that I feel when I either look out across a vast ocean, or more particularly when we look at the sky and the universe. And my son Josh, as you may know him, he's very into cosmology, and so there we've gone to things on dark matter and stars and planets, and we've gone to see an eclipse in another country. And always, particularly for me, when I look at the moon, I'm reminded I live on a planet in this incredible universe, and I don't quite understand the distance between the fact that I'm seeing these stars and that their light may have gone out where they actually are, but towards me, because of that traveling of distance, a vast distance, I'm still seeing them. And that reminds me of those that our memory is still here, so they're still alive in us, those people we lost, and that heaven is perhaps a vastness I can't quite comprehend, but like that, where you can get an inkling of it from the stars that shine, and maybe the stars that shine are the people's memories who've gone. So maybe that is our inkling of heaven, the goodness we've experienced from the people here. But I accept that I can't quite comprehend it because of its vastness. And it's, in a sense, space gives me that idea of that I can't quite comprehend, because I can't put myself in that distance to those stars, being a little human down here on Earth.
You've probably guessed, based on what I said about the Revelation reading from the Bible, that I'm not entirely on board with Emily Dickinson's poem. The notion that heaven is only of the mind, or so far of the mind as to be essentially sort of invisible otherwise, just doesn't sit well with the idea that earth and heaven come together at the end. It doesn't sit well with me either, I think, because it comes quite close to making heaven basically the same as our idea of it. And maybe that's true for us in a way, in that, we all have our own ideas of heaven, or for that matter, of tables and chairs. But, you can still sit at the table, you can still sit on the chair, and you can still visit a heaven that turns out to be a really real thing, not just a figment of your imagination. Nor can we shape heaven to our own ends. Heaven is what it is because God wills it, and not because we shape it. He loves us, and there is a place for us in it. So, yes, I'm interested in Emily Dickinson's poem, but I'm not terribly taken with it.
So this vision of heaven to me, and when it was written, I think many people hadn't seen mountains and lakes and vastness in their own everyday life, and that artist's job was perhaps to give you that, just like I was mentioning the vastness of the universe, of the stars and the oceans. And so the landscape is stunning and a vast beauty of creation, and I guess that's what perhaps that view of heaven was, the eternally changing nature of it as well. The fact that it looks like in a picture when you draw it, but the next day you saw that picture, the weather may change. The mountain may look solid, but it's covered in ice sometimes. It's always having landslides. So while we look at things that look like they're a permanence, perhaps heaven isn't a permanence. It's in the sense of a solid thing to look at or be viewed as going to, like our consciousness isn't something that we can grasp. I think that heaven, we try and grasp it in the way that we can relate to it. but further away from it or close up to it, perspective will be ever changing, perhaps, just like the view in the picture, if you were actually being there.
The Plains of Heaven. It's not a very well known painting, and perhaps the reason for that is my first reaction to it. There's not much going on here. There are some figures seated at the front, all dressed in white, with possibly a few cherubs at the front. It's hard to be sure, particularly the resolution you're probably watching this at. But they are tiny, tiny details. But then I thought about it and I thought, well, that's the point, isn't it? That's what the artist is trying to say. The vastness of heaven and the loveliness of it as well. If you like to sort of see God in nature, if that sort of does it for you, as I know quite a few people at St Mary's are taken that way, then this literally supernatural scene really ought to draw you in. And the thing I particularly love about how it's done, I think it's very cleverly painted, because the mountains in the background merge into the clouds in such a way that you're never quite sure whether the next layer beyond is mountain or cloud. And I've certainly had that experience, sort of walking in the hills in places I don't know. It's kind of, are those hills or is that just cloud? And that effect on me is to give me a sense of there is an infinity. Actually, there are always new mountains to climb. And I don't know if you've ever come across some of these pictures of heaven, which are basically just people sitting around with their harps. And what do you do in heaven? What's the point of heaven? And I think this picture for me is challenging that idea that heaven is somehow limited, because I don't think God wants us to be limited. I think the intention of bringing heaven and earth together is precisely to take away some of the limits that we've experienced in life as we know it. It's the limits of life and death, of sickness and old age and so on. That actually in a place where death is no more and crying is no more, only then can we start to face the challenges and the depths of everything that God has in store with us. So it's a very hopeful thing, despite there being not much action on the surface. And maybe that also reflects where heaven is for us. We don't always see heaven breaking through into our lives in a powerful and exciting way. It can happen, it can certainly happen, but it doesn't always. Just think, beyond there are the mountains and the mountains and the mountains. There is always more with God.
And I guess I come strongest to the feeling that all these ideas of what heaven is, and the first thing my thoughts about is there a Christian view into the campaign? Well, maybe the Christian view for me is that God is love, and I can understand love, and love is a vastness. It's intangible, you can't grasp it, but you know it has a strength, and that if this first heaven and earth, as in the Revelation said, is gone, and you have the new heaven with God, that will be the existence of love as God, as us. So the Greek 4 words describe love in many different ways: of friendship, of sexual love, of love of God, and the one that I can't remember right this moment. But I think that is it. It'll be a vastness of love, including our Lord. And those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Well, we're coming to the end of this episode, and as we finish, I just want to say thank you again to Sally for her contributions, and particularly for that marvellous Bainton anthem that she's kind of introduced us to here. I had some kind of final thoughts on heaven, most of which go back to kind of popular songs of the 80s and 90s. Belinda Carlisle nearly got it right, I think. Although heaven isn't yet a place on earth, it's going to be, and she gets bonus points for recognising that heaven is a place where love comes first. I think the popular music prize for getting it nearly right, though, goes to Eric Clapton for Tears in Heaven. If you've not heard that, do. It's a wonderful, moving, and very sad song, written in very sad circumstances, as he grieved the loss of his young son. And it's full, as you might expect, of questions about, heaven. What will it be like? Will we know each other in heaven? Things that have exercised Christians actually over the ages. But there are two really important things in there that Clapton recognises. Firstly, that heaven is not yet. That actually he is not fit. He can't stay. Even imaginatively, he can't stay in heaven forever. Because heaven is this place where there are no more tears. And he's not ready for that. And I know many of us won't be either. But let's not forget that beyond this life, there is another. That heaven itself is, as we know, it is sometimes only a waiting room for that final thing that brings heaven and earth together, and us together with God. If you want to know more about that, I can recommend a book. It's a book by Tom Wright, who's a bishop and theologian, called Surprised by Hope. You may not agree with everything in it. I'm not sure I do, but it is surprising in places, and there is definitely a huge amount of hope on offer. So I recommend that. That's about all for this week, I think, then. Next week, we will be looking at the tricky issue of hell. So until then, thanks for listening. God bless.